On behalf of the Rockland County Police Chiefs Association and the Rockland County Patrolmen's Benevolent Association, I'd like to welcome everyone here for the 40th Annual Brink's Memorial Ceremony, honoring the memory of Sergeant Edward J. O'Grady, Jr., and Police Officer Waverly Chipper Brown of the Nyack Police Department, and Brink's security guard, Peter Page. Before we start the formal part of the program, I want to take a moment just to introduce some of the police and elected officials who are with us today. On the elected side, we have our County Executive, Ed Day, the District Attorney of the County of Rockland, Thomas Walsh, our County Clerk, Donna Silberman, New York State Senator, Elijah Reichlin Melnick, New York State Assemblyman Ken Zabrowski, New York State Assemblyman Michael Lawler, Mayor Don Hammond, Village of Nyack, Mayor Bonnie Christian, Village of South Nyack, Mayor Ed Markunis, Village of Suffern, John Gould, Councilman, Town of Haverstraw, the Honorable Kevin Russo, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Orangetown Town Supervisor Teresa Kenny, Town Supervisor of the Town of Clarkstown, George Holman, Orangetown Councilman Tom Dibney, Supervisor Michael Speck, Town of Ramapo, the Honorable Howard Gerber, Town Justice, Town of Clarkstown, the Honorable Bill Franks, Town Justice, Town of Stony Point, Rockland County Legislator John McGowan, Clarkstown Councilman Frank Borelli, and Clarkstown Councilman Pat Carroll, and Judge DeSere from the Village of Spring Valley. We also have joining us today the President and CEO of Nyack Hospital, Montefiore Nyack Hospital, Mark Geller. On the police side, the Sheriff of Rockland County, Louis Falco, Chief Daniel Wilson, Chief of the South Nyack Police Department and President of the Rockland County Police Chiefs Association. Clarkstown Chief Jeffrey Wanamaker, Orangetown Chief Donald Butterworth, Town of Haverstraw Chief Peter Murphy, Town of Ramapo Chief Martin Riley, Chief of Detectives of the District Attorney's Office Peter Walker, Chief Andrew Laughlin, Suffern Police, Chief William Barbera, Sheriff's Patrol, Joe Alejandro, the Second Vice President of New York City PDA, Chief Retired Kevin Nolte, Chief Retired Kevin Kilduff, Chief Retired Brent Newberry, Chief Ed Finn from the Town of Stony Point, former United States Marshal for the Southern District of New York, Michael Greco, Larry Ayers, Police Officer of the Town of Orangetown and President of the Rockland County Patrolmen's Benevolent Association. And as we do at most of our ceremonies, we want to thank the Blue Knights and the Non-Knights for joining us. I'd now like to call upon the Clarkstown Police Honor Guard for the presentation of our nation's colors.
You're good. time. March.
I'd now like to call upon Chief Jeffrey Wanamaker, Chief of the Clarkstown Police Department, who will lead us in the salute to the flag, along with Minister Angel Hill, who will perform our national anthem.
Colors. Present. Arms. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last streaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Colors. Order. Arms.
I'd now like to call upon the Reverend David S. Lothrop, Chaplain for the Clarkstown Police Department, to lead us in an opening prayer. Reverend?
Let us pray. Oh God, in this world that is crumbling before our eyes, and when our men and women in law enforcement are battling an upward battle, we come to remember those who died fighting to protect the dignity and our freedom. On this spot 40 years ago, just a few miles away, domestic terrorism showed its ugly face. Today we again remember Sergeant Edward O'Grady, Police Officer Waverly Chipper Brown, Brink security guard Peter Page. Too many in our society have chosen the road of evil, but because of the bravery that Eddie, Chipper, and Peter displayed, this community is a much safer place. Yes, this day will always be a day of remembrance in Rockland County. Sadly, some former government officials saw things differently, and that made the wounds a little deeper. However, we who are gathered here today make this promise that we will never forget Eddie, Chipper, and Peter, along with their families who have endured much. We now remember those wounded on that fatal day. Continue to uphold them in your arms. As these wreaths are now placed here on this 40th anniversary, may it be but a small token of remembrance of the great sacrifice that these men made on our behalf. This we ask in thy name. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend. I'd now ask Chief Daniel Wilson, President of the Police Chiefs Association, and Police Officer Larry Ayers, President of the Rockland County PBA, to come forward for the presentation of the memorial wreaths. which will be followed by a rifle salute, taps, and Amazing Grace.
Colors, present, arms.
I'd now like to introduce our guest speaker today, Kenneth J Maxwell, a special person who, along with members of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, came to Nyack on October 20th, 1981, and led the federal investigation into the events of that tragic day. Ken spent 23 years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, retiring as Assistant Special Agent in Charge at the Counterterrorism Branch of the Bureau's New York field office. Ken joined the FBI in 1979 as an original member of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and over the course of his career in the FBI, worked as a special agent in Washington, D.C. and in New York. Ken was the ranking FBI official responsible for the investigation into the accident that brought down TWA Flight 800. And he's a native New Yorker who began his law enforcement career in the military police force of the U.S. Army, later joining the New York State Office of Special Prosecutor as a special audit investigator, and then serving 2 years as a New York State Trooper. Ken continues to have a close working relationship with law enforcement in Rockland County and is quick to lend a hand and his many years of experience as we continue to train and address these threats that face our community. Ladies and gentlemen, Kenneth J. Maxwell.
Thank you so much, Bob. And I apologize for my slow entry. I just had a little bit of back surgeries, but I'm still standing tall. I'm proud to be here today. Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor and privilege to have been asked to share some personal and professional reflections on this very significant and solemn special occasion, the annual commemoration of the heroic actions and sacrifice of 3 brave men who gave their lives protecting the lives and property of others 40 years ago today. By way of brief introduction, I was one of the principal case agents assigned to the FBI's investigation into the tragic events of October 20th, 1981. Together with my many colleagues on the New York Joint Terrorism and Bank Robbery Task Forces, along with many members of the Rockland County law enforcement community, we embarked upon a very formidable and prolonged journey whose objective was to identify every subject and conspirator involved in planning and carrying out this heinous crime, and to collect sufficient facts and evidence to arrest and charge them and hold them accountable in our criminal justice system. Such a journey spanned almost a decade and involved hundreds of FBI agents, state and local police officers, detectives, and prosecutors throughout the country, all working with great resolve and an incredible devotion to the mission at hand, the apprehension and successful prosecution of the domestic terrorists responsible for what can be accurately described as one of the most horrendous crimes of the 20th century. The events of that tragic day have had a lifelong devastating impact upon the families of our fallen heroes and the community at large. It also served as an epiphany of sorts for the entire law enforcement profession and for all who cherish the secure protections afforded to them as citizens of this great nation. Beginning with the courage under fire that the Brink guards displayed at the Nanuet Mall, to the instinctive and exemplary bravery of all of the police officers who engaged the subject at this now sacred intersection, to the immediate and urgent response of the scores of detectives and agents who responded to their colleagues' aid on that fateful day, processing multiple crime scenes, apprehending subjects attempting to flee, collecting and preserving crucial physical evidence, and obtaining significant eyewitness accounts and descriptions, to the painstaking and meticulous undertakings of an army of federal, state, and local investigators over the course of years, interviewing hundreds of witnesses and subjects, apprehending those subjects who managed to escape during the chaos and fog of war that October afternoon, and other co-conspirators, executing multiple search warrants throughout the United States to gather vitally important evidence, including the lawful interception of countless hours of incriminating electronic communication, to the numerous forensic experts who conducted detailed scientific exams, provided key laboratory reports and expert testimony, to the many committed and skillful federal and state prosecutors who artfully and diligently prepared and presented massive amounts of testimony and exhibits to grand juries and at multiple trials. Their collective and singular goal and purpose was constant throughout: to secure justice for Nyack Police Sergeant Ed O'Grady, Police Officer Waverly Chip Brown, and Brink guard Peter Page and their loving families. From the outset, following the identification of 3 of the 4 subjects captured attempting to flee from the shootout scene with the Nyack police, as known members of the Weather Underground organization, 2 of them fugitives, it became quickly apparent that there was nothing ordinary about the subjects responsible for the atrocities committed on that odious afternoon. To the contrary, as the case unfolded over the ensuing months and years, it led to the identification of a sophisticated and clandestine national network of domestic terrorists villainously immersed in its perverse, nefarious, and deluded political objective to foment revolution, as described in their own manifesto, by any means necessary. Translated, to commit acts of violence with the full intent of intimidating the population and creating fear within our society. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the pure definition of terrorism. I can assert with absolute certainty, based upon investigative results obtained from thousands of man-hours expended by the professional law enforcement community, that every single member of this vicious criminal gang participated with full awareness and knowledge of the criminal nature of their undertaking and the inevitability of violence occurring. Indeed, from the sworn and corroborated testimony of reliable cooperating witnesses, it was ascertained that every participant involved in the planning and execution of this crime and many other similar crimes attended strategy meetings, with some of them participating in dry run rehearsals. During all of these preliminary tactical sessions, weapons were visibly present and discussions held as to who would be armed, including those whose assigned roles were providing backup support by driving getaway cars and vehicles intended to obstruct and distract any police response to the armed robberies or robberies which the actors have ludicrously labeled expropriations as some twisted political way of justifying their obvious criminal and contemptible conduct. These drivers were practiced participants in this diversionary support tactic, having utilized it on many prior occasions during the course of other robberies. It was also determined from reliable cooperating witnesses that on the morning itself of October 20th, 1981, a final strategy session was held at the subject's Mount Vernon Safe House apartment, attended by all participants to go over last-minute details prior to driving upstate to the Nanuet Mall in caravan style. All of the drivers, including the operators of the U-Haul truck, observed the presence of a variety of firearms and witnessed the loading of several heavily armed individuals into the red van utilized as the strike vehicle during the Brink truck robbery later that day. The same van whose armed occupants transferred themselves, their weapons, and stolen proceeds into the U-Haul truck that was pre-positioned behind the Corvette store in Nanuet, operated by accomplices totally aware of what had just taken place. Notwithstanding their ardent commitment to what they called armed struggle, even more indicative of the knowledge and premeditative intent of all participating gang members to commit violence in furtherance of their revolutionary crimes, were the specific directions and orders received from the group's leader, Matula Shakur, that no warning or oral commands be given to the Brink's guards, instructing them to turn over the money bags under their control. A marked departure from their prior modus operandi. Rather, because of the resistance experienced in prior robbery attempts, Shakur instructed that the armored truck guards should be immediately fired upon, ambush style, to ensure the success of the robbery. I factually cite these details to publicly address the bogus arguments made to parole commissions and in written appeals to elected officials that certain subjects' roles should be minimized inasmuch as their responsibilities were only those of a vehicle operator, seemingly unaware of the planned violence, and as such should be given some kind of special consideration to be judged differently than their cohorts who actually engaged in the firefights with the guards and the police. Such a fallacious position is a direct contradiction of the facts. Any notion that their self-serving role description and asserted narrow participation in these heinous crimes was limited to that of a driver is a specious one that grossly distorts any semblance of reality. I would like to stress that I make these assertions not out of any sense of unbridled passion or personal emotion, but based upon my intimate knowledge of the investigation conducted and the very extensive evidentiary record of the case. There simply are no mitigating factors to consider in examining the callousness and depraved indifference for human life consciously displayed by these duly convicted criminals at every stage of their involvement. As strong support of these assertions, allow me to offer an additional observation of reasoned analysis contained within a very relevant quote from former United States District Court Judge Frederick Lacey of the District of New Jersey, when he was sentencing a close associate an active member of the Nyack robbery group. This individual had been initially indicted in the Southern District of New York for her active role as the getaway driver in the robbery and shootout with Nyack police on October 20th. Following the conviction on separate but very similar federal felonies, Judge Lacey specifically found that the defendant, who possessed guns and explosives at the time of her arrest, intended to kill, and that she would not have had, quote, the slightest hesitancy or suffer any compunction of conscience in robbing and murdering. Such judicial wisdom should hold true for all of the Brink's defendants and should be applied and emulated in reviewing any request for parole or clemency. To be fair and just, any appeal for leniency or early release should also include a close examination of the broad operational scope and dimension of the significant criminal activity associated with the Brink's gang itself. It was comprised of a secret conglomeration of like-minded criminal revolutionaries drawn from the ranks of diverse but philosophically similar domestic terrorist organizations such as the Weather Underground, the May 19th Communist Organization, the Black Liberation Army, and the Republic of New Africa. Perversely calling itself the Family, this pernicious syndicate was known at a minimum to have participated in substantial crimes of violence from 1976 through 82 that spanned 4 states. During that time, as formally charged in a federal racketeering indictment handed down by a grand jury in the Southern District of New York, this criminal enterprise engaged in numerous unrestrained crimes that included the use of violence, murder, kidnapping, threats of violence, and conspiracies to commit murder in order to achieve its revolutionary goals. Among the specific predicate acts named in the indictment were the Brink's armored truck robbery and murders committed on October 20th, 40 years ago today, the armed robbery of the Brink's armored truck and the murder of one of its guards in the Bronx in June of 1981. Numerous other armored truck and bank robberies and attempted robberies, and carrying out the armed prison escape of the infamous BLA member Joanne Chesmard, aka Asada Shakur, from the Clinton Reformatory for Women in New Jersey in November 1979. It is important to note that every single member of the family was named as a co-racketeer in this far-reaching indictment, regardless of any specific role assigned to them. In essence, they acted in concert to further their venal criminal objectives over a long period of time, and as such should be held fully accountable for the unspeakable and atrocious acts they committed against innocent victims who were merely doing their job, not to mention the permanent pain and suffering inflicted upon their victims' families. I know I speak for the law enforcement community at large and the vast majority of our law-abiding citizens that true accountability for dastardly and mindless deeds, once proven to have been committed intentionally by malevolent individuals without regard for the sanctity of life, should include severe penalties and unchangeable consequences, incapable of being abrogated by overly subjective assessments or any lack of understanding of the lasting societal impact of the crimes committed, or the unjustifiable and inexplainable whim of elected or appointed public officials. In closing, as we focus upon the primary purpose of our annual gathering today, the solemn commemoration of our fallen heroes, let me very respectfully acknowledge the incredible strength and love of the O'Grady, Brown, and Page families, whose fortitude and perseverance to live on despite the immense challenges and personal tragedy over the past 4 decades, have served as virtuous inspiration to all of us. Allow me to also acknowledge the courage and commitment of the many members of the Rockland County law enforcement community who were directly involved in the line of fire and resulting mayhem that day, and who continue to pursue justice in the many months and years that followed, some of whom are sadly no longer with us. One of those individuals, former Nyack Police Lieutenant Phil Newman, very appropriately commented to the press about the overall impact of the case following the sentencing of the two masterminds of these iniquitous crimes after their conviction in federal court in 1988. Phil said, quote, "A lot of positives came out of this. Although unfortunately we lost 2 police officers and an armored car security guard, only God knows how many lives we actually saved with this investigation." That sentiment was similarly echoed on the inscription of a memorial plaque presented to the Nyack Police Department by the members of the New York Joint Terrorism and Bank Robbery Task Forces. It read, "Let it not be said that they died in vain. Rather, let it be proclaimed that their ultimate sacrifice served to enlighten the entire law enforcement community to a national problem. It is my fervent hope and desire that such enlightenment will one day spread among all public officials in positions of power, and that they always place the support of the brave men and women of law enforcement and their families and the primacy of public safety as a mandated priority over any personal or political gain. One thing is certain, however, the men and women of law enforcement will continue to be faithful to their oath of office and protect their communities to the best of their ability. In so doing, they perpetually honor the ultimate sacrifice of all of their fallen comrades in arms and ensure the lasting legacy of those we venerate today and every day. Thank you again for the honor of addressing you today. May God bless you all, and may God bless America.
I'd now like to call upon members of the O'Grady, Brown, and Page family, Diane O'Grady, Michael Page, and Constance Frazier, and ask that you please come forward for a few remarks.
On behalf of my family, as well as the families of Edward O'Grady and Waverly Brown, I would like to say that it is truly an honor to stand before you here today in remembrance of my father, Peter Page, Edward O'Grady, and Waverly Brown. As you all know, today marks the 40th anniversary of the day we lost these 3 brave and honorable men. There is not a day that goes by that we do not think of them. They are forever in our minds and in our hearts. Each year we come to this memorial site, not to grieve their loss, but to honor their memory and to give due respect and recognition to all that they stood for and all that they died for. And this year, it is with a heavy heart that we also honor Chief Alan Colsey, who we all know was instrumental in apprehending those responsible for the murders of these 3 brave men. And just as we are all gathered here, I know that Chief Colsey, along with his fellow officers who have also come to pass, together with our loved ones, are all gathered up in heaven and are looking down upon us and smiling, just knowing how much you all care. They are forever watching over us and protecting us, just as they did when they were here. Chief Colsey also will forever be remembered for the way he lived his life, his duty, his loyalty, his dedication, his service to others before himself. He will forever be a part of our families, just as all of you who continue to attend this memorial service each and every year, you are all a part of our families. This memorial service today reminds us of and recognizes the courage and bravery exhibited by these 3 men on that October day. And it will forever serve as a reminder for generations to follow of the respect and recognition that we all have for those whose lives are lost in the lines of duty. And your presence here today ensures and exemplifies, not only for our families, but for us all, that time will never erase the sacrifices that were made by these three brave and honorable men. And the principles for which these men stood for will never be forgotten. Their memories will stand forever because of the honor, integrity, dedication, and loyalty of all of you. And just as there are no words that can truly express what these three men meant to us, there are no words that can truly express the heartfelt gratitude that we, the families, have for all of you. Please know that we are and will always be forever grateful for all you have done and for all that you continue to do. In closing, I'd like to say to my dad and to Edward O'Grady and to Waverly Brown, we miss you, we love you, we are proud of you, and you will always be forever in our hearts. May God bless you all.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, law enforcement officers and families of Sergeant Edward O'Grady Jr., Police Officer Waverly L. Brown, and Brink guard Peter Page, for your loyalty and commitment to attend the 40th Annual Brink's Memorial Ceremony. For the Brown family, it seems like it was only yesterday that Sergeant Edward O'Grady and Officer Waverly Brown, my cousin, set up a police barricade to stop the Weather Underground, Secure, Kathy Bodine, Judith Clark, from accessing the Tappan Zee Bridge, and were brutally murdered, along with Brink guard Peter Page. The memory of that beautiful autumn day, which is very similar to today, has remained forever etched in the episodic memories for Chippy's children, Gregory, Karen, and Lorraine, his grandchildren, his companion, Mary LaPorta, all Rockland County police officers and residents. The family is very grateful to Under Sheriff Robert Van Cure. He has been the wind beneath the family's wings in more ways than one. Greg can always call him. And most importantly, we're very grateful for the support of the residents from Rockland County. Your love and kindness given to my family during the past 40 years cannot be measured. Sadly, those who were responsible for the deaths of these three men, who gave the ultimate sacrifice to protect the lives of Rockland County residents on October 20th, 1981, have been exonerated and released, and some have moved on with their lives and families, while the families of Chippy, Eddie, and Peter are left with only loving memories of their presence. In closing, we little knew when we woke that morning the sorrow the day would bring. For the act was sudden, and the shock of our loss was so severe when we all had to part with the ones we loved so dear. God bless you, Ed. God bless you, Chippy. God bless you, Peter. What you did for the residents of Rockland County on October 20, 1981 will never, ever be forgotten. We love you all madly. Peace.
It appears I'm going to be a little long-winded, so bear with me. Hello, and thank you for being here today. 40 years ago on this very spot, I lost my dad, and my children lost their father. Earlier this month, Ed and I should have celebrated our 48th wedding anniversary. Instead, I was taking a phone call from the victim's impact about David Gilbert. His parole hearing has been postponed, and it could very well be today or sometime this week. I don't want to spend a lot of time on Gilbert. I made myself a promise that after 40 years, they will not take another minute of my time. They've taken enough from my family. However, I'd like to point out the arrogance of two politicians. The last cowardice act of a disgraced New York governor was to wait until the very last moment of his embarrassing term to commute David Gilbert's sentence. The other is Chester Boudin. Boudin is David Gilbert and Kathy Boudin's son. I used to have tremendous sympathy for him because he was innocent. He was not a part of this. But Boudin has been very active on social media, going as far as calling my son out. His opinion is his father should be released because, and I quote here, "My father didn't intend harm." The attempts by Mr. Boudin and others to rewrite history notwithstanding, it is important to clarify that Gilbert is neither an activist nor a freedom fighter. Just like the numerous accomplices and co-conspirators, many of whom have already met successful bids for parole, he is a common criminal. He is a thug. When you rob an armored car with automatic weapons, it ends one way, and you certainly mean harm. Mr. Boudin has bragged on social media how he cannot wait to hug his father. My son can relate. He too would love to hug his father, but he'll never be able to. It's time for Boudin to be quiet. I am not naive. I know politics and current events play into this decision to release Gilbert, but that doesn't make it right. It didn't make it right when all the others got out. The winds of change are blowing, and when it comes to social injustices in this country, that's a good thing. Those who murder police officers in the name of social justice, it makes them dangerous and it makes them terrorists. Police officers across this country are under siege. To release somebody who is convicted and sentenced to 75 years to life for the planning is wrong on so many levels. It is an insult to the families, all of us who are here today, and it sends the wrong message to law enforcement, and it disrespects all of them and all of you here today. We are here today to remember and honor those who gave the ultimate sacrifice 40 years ago. Ed, Chipper, Peter, and also Artie Keenan, who was wounded. I would like to include Brian Lennon and Alan Colsey, who both played a pivotal role that day and whom we have also lost. Today I'd like to speak on a more personal level. I think law enforcement has spoke about what happened here. I always get asked how my children were doing. They were so young. Edward was 6 and he was Ed's little buddy. They went for hot chocolate whenever Ed had a day off. Patricia was 2 and Ed called her his little sassy Miss Lennon. She has Ed's wit and sense of humor. Kimberly was 5 months and Ed called her his little leprechaun. She resembles Ed the most with her light coloring, and they all have his grin. And I believe Ed's spirit lives through them. Today I'd like to share who they are now as young adults. I'm so proud because they all moved forward, prospered, became contributing, kind adults. We received a lot of love and support, and that helped keep them balanced, as well as myself. Our son Edward has retired as a naval captain after 24 years of service to his country. His last appointment was Afghanistan for 18 months. Right now he is enjoying playing Mr. Mom, being home for his wife and 2 daughters. He's making up for lost time after many deployments. He also enjoys volunteering for his community. Our daughter Patricia is a fitness and spin instructor. She lives in Austin, Texas, and she is raising a sassy 13-year-old. Our youngest works for Lockheed Martin in counterintelligence. She recently was vetting an application for Lockheed, and during that process, Kimberly sensed something was amiss. She contacted the FBI, and together they discovered he was a longtime spy for China. He'll now spend the rest of his life in federal prison. Ed would have been beaming right now. I would also like to add a word about Brink Brown here. He is living in upstate New York, and he has two of the most adorable, precious two grandsons, and he is doing great. Please understand why these young adults are not here today. They would like to, but they live in other states, they have young children and commitments in their busy lives. They need no disrespect not being here. And they are very grateful for all of those who still attend this memorial and honor their fathers. I feel the loss of Ed every day in my heart and soul. I must admit, as our friends retire and share their golden years, I feel very alone, and I miss him very much. This should have been our time together. Instead, we're fighting royal bearings. My true source of heartache, though, comes from what Ed missed out with our children. He missed a lifetime with each and every one of them, and they missed having him there as his biggest cheerleader. He'll never hold his grandchildren or watch them grow. I would also like to take the time to share some of the positive that many of you don't know about that came our way. I remember on the way to the cemetery, seeing all the people lined up on 59, saluting as we went by. To this day, that brings tears to my eyes. The baker, who every Sunday dropped boxes of treats on our front stoop. The beautiful flowers that would randomly appear at the door and only read, "You are still in our prayers." The bikes for Edward and the many stuffed animals and dolls the girls received that first Christmas, they still have those dolls. All the letters and cards that continued for years after. I received a beautiful note from Jackie Kennedy, and it was very thoughtful, but the many letters from school children who wrote how sad they were and sent coins from their piggy bank to my kids meant more. It was obvious this tragedy broke the hearts of many in Rockland County, but not just Rockland County. It went far and wide. When I miss Ed, this is what I try to remember, because as I think how he died, it is gut-wrenching 40 years later. I want to thank my family, friends, law enforcement, and strangers alike for your support over 40 years. Many of you are here today, and it is because of your support we survived, lived full lives, albeit without our Ed. I want to point out one individual who for 40 years stood tirelessly by us. He kept me informed all these years so I didn't have to hear something on the news. And because of that, he has taken many, and I mean many, tearful and angry calls from me. He encouraged us when we just didn't want to take another step forward. He accompanied me to the tour de force when New York City rode for Ed. He always makes me smile, and he helps me remember the Ed I married, not how Ed died. I would not be standing here today if it were not for Bobby Whitfield. Father, thank you from the bottom of my heart for 40 years of support. You never wavered. My children and Greg thank you too. This will be the last year that I will speak. That's why this is kind of long. It takes too long to stop shaking and for the tears to keep falling. And over the years, I believe I've shared and said it all. However, I now live in Virginia, and I will be able to attend more often. I am so grateful for all of you that come each and every year. Also for those that can't come, but still keep us in their prayers. To see this crowd 40 years later is beyond words, and it touches my heart. I know that the sacrifices that were made here October 20th, 1981 will never be forgotten, and they will forever be honored. In my heart, my Ed is smiling down on us today and probably knocking over the flowers. And I know he is sitting there with a big grin. Please let us all also honor all law enforcement and keep them in our prayers daily. In closing, I would like to share something from Rose Kennedy because I know these words to be true. It has been said, time heals all wounds. I do not agree. The wounds remain. In time, the mind, protecting its sanity, covers them with scar tissue, and the pain lessens, but it never goes away. Thank you for being here, and Godspeed to all.
Peter, County, Diane, thank you very much. And thank you to all the families who come each year. Heidi, Susan, Josephine, Ed's sister Mary, thank you. I'd now like to call upon the Sheriff of Rockland County, Sheriff Louis Falcon III, for some closing comments.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my privilege and honor to stand before you here today on the 40th anniversary of this tragic day in Rockland County history. A horrific day for both the residents of Rockland County and our law enforcement community. As I look at all of you today, in years that have produced so many challenges, I see so many of the same faces that have stood side by side over the past 40 years. Many new faces as well, proudly recognizing three heroes, three brave men that made the ultimate sacrifice. Brink guard Peter Page, Police Officer Waverly Chipper Brown, and Sergeant Edward O'Grady Jr. Their sacrifices has a lasting effect on the police community, their families, and our nation. But as long as we stand here together, year after year, to honor these brave men who were so tragically taken from us, protecting our community and doing their job, they will never be forgotten. The senseless and cowardly acts that day caused so much pain on that day in 1981. It has not deterred us, but it has made us stronger. It has served as an inspiration for law enforcement, not only here in Rockland County, but across our country. We continue to do whatever we do as officers to serve and protect our communities, both here in Rockland County and across this great nation. And I want to make it clear to everybody here today, I'm proud to be a police officer. I was working on that day. I looked out and there's many, many retired police officers that are here today that were working that day, and the many days and weeks and months and years afterward to bring this to closure so we had a positive outcome with our criminal justice system. Let us remember why we stand here today, 40 years later. We do so to honor and respect three great men, Ed, Chip, and Peter. But it's more than that. It's a lot more than that. The terrorists didn't win that fateful day. As long as we remember Ed, Chipper, and Peter, and the many dedicated officers like them across this nation, they will never win. Two other officers I would like to mention, Detective Artie Keenan and Police Officer Brian Lennon, who also stood their ground right here that day. Brothers that survived that horrific day 40 years ago. Unfortunately, Brian passed away and is deeply missed by many. This past July, we also lost South Nyack Police Chief Alan Posey, who was responsible for the capture of several of the terrorists who fled that scene that day. Alan would also be deeply missed by his family and remains in our thoughts and prayers. I want to take this opportunity to recognize somebody that stood here that day. Artie, would you just come forward a minute, please? So you know, this is Detective Artie Keenan of the Nyack Police Department. Artie Keenan was here in that gun battle that day. He was actually wounded that day. He didn't even know he was shot. He found that out when he got to the hospital, checking on his two brother officers. And not only did that not deter him, he returned to this scene and continued to work through the night. Artie, your commitment that you made sure who perpetrated these acts of terrorism remain that they belong in prison as long as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you one of our heroes, Artie Keenan. The cowardly act by our former governor in granting clemency to one of the terrorists on his way out the door is truly reprehensible. And I want to thank Artie and everyone else who has written to the parole board or signed petitions in opposition to parole in this case. I would like to close by thanking all of you who took time out of your day today to join us on this solemn occasion. And thank the O'Grady, Brown, and Cage families. They will never forget the sacrifices of their loved ones.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank a few people who helped to make this day possible. I'd like to thank Supervisor George Holman and the town of Clarkstown for all the work that they do here at the memorial site, along with Mayor Don Hammond and the Nyack Department of Public Works for their help as well. A special thank you to James Mealy from Belleville Landscaping for their help in maintaining the site and making it as beautiful as it is today. They come every year and plant these flowers to make the ceremony very special. I'd also like to thank the Hanneman Funeral Home for the replacement of the perpetual candle assemblies, and the Rockland County Patrolmen's Benevolent Association and the O'Grady Brown Scholarship Fund for the new Nyack Police patch that you see there behind the monument that was replaced this year due to the weathering of the old one. I'd also like to thank the Honor Guard units, the police chiefs, and all the members of law enforcement who are here today, the Rockland County Emerald Society Pipes and Drums, the community members who took time to join us today, and everyone that's here. I also want to thank Minister Angel Hill for sharing her voice with us today. She's a 40-year Nyack resident. We thank you for coming and joining the ceremony. I'd like to close the ceremony today in memory of Chief Alan Colsey, who was a friend and mentor to me, who passed away, as you heard, in July. And all the officers of the Nyack Police Department who are here with us today. They quietly stand there each year, showing respect for Ed and Chipper and Peter, and their lives were forever changed on this day 40 years ago. So I want to thank them as well. Sergeant McDonald, please dismiss the detail.
Detail, dismiss.
Thank you, everyone.